Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our discussion about construction bonds. My name is Autumn, and I handle business development in the Orlando and also the Jacksonville areas. For those unfamiliar with Castle Group, we're a premier property management company specializing in full-time on-site community management. We're committed to delivering royal service through innovative solutions, exceptional support, and a hands-on approach tailored to each community's unique needs. I am excited to be here with you all today. And before we dive in, I'd like to hand it over to Mike to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Witter. I'm the Vice President for Empire Works Reconstruction. We are a national exterior renovation company that specializes in exterior renovations from roofing, siding, stucco, windows, decking, and waterproofing for HOA and multifamily communities. So very happy to be here today and talk to everybody about construction bonds.
I do have a few housekeeping items. Before we get started, we have muted all participant devices to maximize background noise and ensure everyone can hear clearly. Feel free to submit questions at any time using the question and answer feature on the toolbar. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. And you can adjust your view settings by selecting view options on the toolbar and choosing the side-by-side option for the best experience. Thanks again for joining today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
All righty. So I pulled up my screen now, and we are going to be talking about construction bonds. Construction bonds are a very integral process in terms of any kind of large reconstruction project. Construction bonds act as an insurance policy. A lot of questions that you may have that come up during this topic, I will be answering as I get through the slideshows. But if you do have a question, feel free to throw it in the question and answers segment here down at the bottom of your screen, and I will get to all your answers if they're not answered during the webinar. So without further ado, we'll go through some basics about what a construction bond is. So a construction bond is a guarantee between parties. It's going to be the builder or the contractor, such as a company like ourselves, who is then getting a policy with a surety company to get a guarantee. There's multiple kinds of bonds when it comes to construction work. We're going to focus on explaining what those three bond styles are. But realistically, there's really one really important bond that's going to apply to any kind of large HOA project. So why communities should have a construction bond? So construction bonds, like I said, are an insurance policy. These provide loss protection. They allow you to vet a contractor before you're performing the work and to really understand how financially stable and how stable that company is. It also allows you to make sure that your contract is going to be fulfilled should anything happen during the process of the project. And we'll go into more detail about what those issues might be that come up during a construction project, where this will trigger the bond and show where that bond's actually going to provide protection, and a couple case studies of where that bond wasn't in place and the negative aspects that can happen after a policy if it's not in place beforehand. So financial loss protection. When you have a bond in place and a performance bond, by purchasing and submitting one of these bonds, the bondholder is going to be the complex itself. So XYZ HOA would then hold the surety bond. So in this case, it would be a performance bond. It's a legally binding agreement that they have the financial means in order to produce the project. If there's an issue with them becoming insolvent, whether they're unable to finish the project or things are not completed up to par in terms of quality assurances, this would then trigger one of these policies, in which case the supplier and the surety company would then provide the monetary funds to hire an additional contractor to come and complete that work. An example would be, and this is an example of a home builder in North Carolina. This owner here, this company had contracted to do many buildings, many homes for these owners. This is actually the subcontractors were not paid for the work. The company became insolvent, and the clients were left having put out all their money. They had left the homes unfinished. They had taken all the money for building the properties, and then left without paying any of the subcontractors completing the work. And had there been a bond in place, if a performance bond in place or a payment bond, the payment bond would have then covered the subcontractors who inevitably filed liens against the home, as well as covered for the amount of the work that needed to be completed and had another contractor come in to complete that work. Financial loss protection. So if contractor fails to abide by any of the conditions of the contract, the bonding agency and contractor are both held liable. And so, like I said, going back to who owns that policy is owned by the customer, and the customer in this case would be the HOA. Any loss that ensues due to failure to deliver the project as agreed or due to the damage or defective work will be covered by the construction bond. So once again, similar here, if the work is not performed up to par, if there's issues with the completion of the work, that bond is going to get triggered and it's going to provide the finances to bring in another contractor to complete that work. If a contractor in the middle of the project declares bankruptcy, the bonding agency would then be on the hook to file to provide the additional funds in order to bring in another contractor to complete that work or reimburse the company or reimburse the client with the full amount of the bond in order to be able to process that work. So there's a couple ways to go about how these bonds come into play and who provides them. So a surety company, like an insurance company, you can kind of think of it like a car, right? So if you have your car, your vehicle, or your truck, you have insurance. If you get in a lot of accidents, your insurance is going to be much higher. If you have a really good driving record, your insurance is going to be lower. So when you're looking at a company and what their bonding capacity is, what their bonding number is, say you have $1 million project, that bond rate might be anywhere from 0.5% to 5% of the total cost of the project. That number is going to be based upon the surety company's evaluation of the company, their financials, their past projects, and their bonding capacity, how many projects they have going on at one given time. That underwriter will then provide a percentage number to the project price, and that would be the number that they have for their bond. So oftentimes what we see on contracts and we see on bid forms is a line item, and the line item is going to be, what is the cost of that performance bond? One question people ask all the time is, who pays for the performance bond? Well, typically the HOA is going to pay for that performance bond, which is why we typically insist that it's put as a line item for any large projects. It can be paid for. Some contractors will provide it free of charge. It really depends, but having that number and knowing what's being charged for performance bond helps to evaluate the validity of that contract and that contractor's ability to perform the work. Here's another case study of a Northern Texas construction company. They had dozens of clients. They were performing work. They collected a lot of this very similar situation here. Collected a lot of the funds up front. So this gentleman's mom, she had paid up front $115,000. She received little to no completed work, and this was done after a fire. So there was a fire. She got money from an insurance company. She went ahead, she hired a contractor. That contractor took a massive upfront charge and then didn't complete any of the work. Because there wasn't a bond in place and she hadn't paid to have a surety or a liability policy with this contractor, she was left with uncompleted work and no money left to do it. Very, very sad story. Once again, this could have been avoided. A bonding agency would have investigated this company and determined that they were insolvent before even providing a bond. This company was on the outs before they were ever even hired to perform this work. And had they been insisted to provide a bond, they would have found out that this company was unbondable because their financial status wasn't in a position for them to be able to perform this type of work. All righty. Once again, these are the qualities here of how they evaluate a company and how they determine what that bond rate is going to be. So character. Has the contractor shown good character with the previous work and completed contracts? So that's going to go back to the track record of projects completed. Capital and financials. Does the contractor have enough working capital to be able to perform this work? Can they pay all their vendors and their subcontractors and their employees to perform this work? The last one is going to be capacity, also known as bonding capacity. Does a contractor have the skills and the ability to complete the proposed project? So oftentimes a contractor is going to be limited as to the size or how much bonding capacity they have. A large contractor may have 50, 100, $200 million in bonding capacity, while a small company might only have $1 million or $2 million of bonding capacity. And that's going to be based upon these factors in terms of their financial liquidity, as well as their previous projects and track record. So once again, we're going to keep on hammering home here. The construction bonds, they're a guarantee. They're a guarantee that the contractor will complete the job, and they're an assurance that that job will be completed at the price that you guys had agreed on initially in the contract. Couple more case studies here. This is another example of contractor. 2001, this gentleman hired JK Development Group to tear down and rebuild a home. Work was behind schedules, rife with errors. The contractor then abandoned the job completely. This gentleman had to work with the subcontractors to try to complete the job, ended up having to pay them double what originally they thought they were going to have to pay. Had there been a bond in place here, that money, that additional funds needed in order to pay those subcontractors to complete the work properly, despite being massively underbid during the original project agreement, that would have been covered by the bond. So despite the fact that it cost twice as much as what they had originally agreed upon to do, and that was the agreement they had with the general contractor, this gentleman was still able to work with the subcontractors and get it done, but it cost him twice as much money. So while he wasn't out money to that general contractor for the funds, as it was in the other case, in this case, he ended up having to pay double what he had originally agreed upon to and budgeted for to do the project. Had he had a bond in place and this gentleman would have walked off the project, that additional funds and the amount of money needed in order to properly produce this project would have been provided by the surety company, and therefore they would have got the agreed upon price and the work completed at that rate. Fun fact here, this company, JK Development Group, when they finally dug into this gentleman and they found out about him, his bankruptcy showed that he owed money to close to 100 clients or 100 people between subcontractors, vendors, and residents that he had been hired from and walked away from the project. So when he went bankrupt, there was a lot of people left hanging in the wind, and a lot of money out that they were never going to recap from anybody. All right. So once again, the construction bond provides peace of mind, just like an insurance contract when or an insurance for a vehicle. When you're driving on the road, you have the peace of mind of knowing that if something were to happen, that you're covered and it's not going to come out of your pocket. The project will be completed on time. A lot of times there's going to be a time deadline in contracts, especially with an AIA contract. An AIA contract will sometimes include things like liquidated damages. Oftentimes, if it gets very behind schedule, those liquidated damages will add up to the point where the contractor will want to pull off the job. Having a bond in place will avoid that from happening. It makes sure the work adheres to the specifications and the quality standards. So oftentimes, and this happens a lot with newly built communities, there will be multiple subcontractors on the job. They will get squeezed for money and they will end up cutting corners. They'll end up cutting corners in terms of the flashing details, in terms of the roofing, the products, the specifications, or the methods. If that happens on a project that is bonded, that bond will then take over and it will pay to hire another contractor to do it correctly, or it will ensure that that contractor does the work correctly and comes back and does it right the first time around. The contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers will be paid in full. That's going into a different type of bond. That's going to be a payment bond. A payment bond is different than a performance bond. The third type of bond is a bid bond, and we're going to go into those details here in just 1 minute. So we talked about this briefly a little bit before, the cost of obtaining a construction bond. And that depends, like I said before, on the financial stability and experience of the builder. Builders, in order to get these, are required to provide their financial statements, work in progress reports, profit margins, organizational structure, and other key documents to evaluate their readiness and ability to perform these projects. The cost of the bond of the project will be a part of the overall construction bid. Choosing a well-established, well-regarded contractor is going to mean that that bid bond is going to be less. That performance bond is going to cost less. Lowers the cost of the community association and provides extra job security. So here are the three main types of bonds when it comes to construction. You have a bid bond, you have a performance bond, and a payment bond. While the bid bonds are important, those are more for municipality jobs, large-scale federal projects. Payment bonds are going to be similar as well. The most important bond that we have here that we really focus on for HOAs is going to be the performance bonds, but we're going to explain all three of them as part of this class. A bid bond. So a bid bond is something that is obtained prior to the bidding process. So before a vendor would be allowed to bid on a project, they'd have to report a bid bond. A bid bond is going to be provided by the surety company before the bid even happens. So the surety company will review the scope of work, an approximation of the cost of the project, and determine if that company is in a situation that they can actually perform that work. If a company cannot perform that work and the surety company deems them as incapable of performing that work, they will not be provided a bid bond and therefore would be excluded from a contract. This happens a lot on governmental contracts, large federal projects or municipality projects. Typically, we don't see this happen in the HOA community, as many of the HOA vendors that perform this type of work are going to be well established and well regarded beforehand and typically come recommended. So these typically don't apply to HOA projects, but it would be something if you had a very massive project to ensure that company before you waste anybody's time to go ahead and get a bid bond. But rarely do we see that happen here in the HOA community. Once again, bid bond, underfunded bidder might run into cash flow problems. Bid bonds help to avoid frivolous bids. Sometimes you get a bid from a contractor that has no right doing that type of work. These would help to mitigate that. But once again, in the HOA market, there's a lot of well-regarded contractors. The management companies are typically familiar. They know the history of these companies, and they can assure you that those companies that they're bringing to the table, especially if you have an engineer on record or an owner's rep, are reputable companies that can perform the work. But it is always an option to have them provide a bid bond. It will slow down the project a little bit because they have to obtain this prior to bidding on the project and providing an actual bid proposal. Performance bonds, like I said before, these are the quintessential items that we recommend for large projects for HOAs. These are going to be the ones that ensure that work gets done on time, on budget, and done properly in terms of quality assurances. It protects the owner from the financial losses if the contractor's work is subpar, defective, and not in accordance with the terms and conditions laid out in the contract. We went over a couple case studies already of how important this can be if a company becomes insolvent, if a company is not delivering the product that they're supposed to be delivering, or simply hasn't done the quality work that they're supposed to be performing per the specifications of the agreement. So if they do not finish on time, meet the standards of quality, consistencies, budget, other aspects of performance, the performance bond will cover those losses above and beyond up to the contract amount. Payment bonds. These ones are very important when you have a lot of subcontractors working on a project. Sometimes we recommend these on large projects where there's multifaceted projects that have many subcontractors. So it's always important when you're bidding on a project and working with a general contractor to understand A, what they're going to be doing in-house, and B, what they're going to be doing with subcontractors. Understanding how many subcontractors that they have and how that system is set up is important because you guys are the clients, and it's important to know who's going to perform the actual work. Is XYZ going to be performing the work, or is subcontractor A, B, C, or D going to be providing the work, and who are those subcontractors? Having them named, labeled, and part of the contract is a very important part of making sure that you protect yourselves as clients of these general contractors. So these are going to be, like I said, they are going to cover any financial payments. So if a general contractor finishes the project, they did a great job, but they didn't pay their roofing subcontractor, they didn't pay their siding subcontractor, they didn't pay their painting subcontractor. All of those subcontractors with the notice of commencement in Florida are going to be allowed to file a lien against your project, or against your community, and against your house in general. So it's important that all these vendors are paid, not just the suppliers, but also the subcontractors. Making sure that they are in line to be able to pay those companies is important. But once again, we really don't see these payment bonds being as an important part of the process unless there's a massive amount of subcontracting being held on this project. The performance bond typically is going to be our number one go-to and our recommended bonding process for HOA communities for large reconstruction projects. Why contractors need a bond and why community associations should acquire them. So at this point in time, I think you've understood, what the benefits are of having a bond and why it's important to have a bond. And it's unfortunate, in a lot of different divisions, there are areas where, you don't have suitable contractors. You have people doing subpar work. I'd say that where we live here in Central Florida and in Florida in general, there are a lot of highly qualified contractors, and you can vet them yourselves. That being said, it's not expensive to get a performance bond and ensure and provide that surety on your side of things. So on any project that's over a certain value where, especially if you don't have the means and the needs or the experience to oversee that project personally, or you don't have a third party overseeing that project. And even in that case, having a performance bond is important, but it's more so important when you're not familiar with the process, you're not familiar with the company, you haven't done work with them over years. Having a performance bond is really going to protect you and your assets from any kind of additional financial liabilities. So one of the questions I get most times is going to be, at what point should we provide a performance bond? And that's different for everybody's situation. You know, it depends on how big the association is, how financially stable the association is, and how big of a project they're performing. You know, if you're doing a small 10, 15, $50,000 repair in a community, probably don't need a performance bond, right? But if you're doing a $500,000, $3 million, $5 million, or $10 million job, it would be in your best interest to make sure that a performance bond is intact prior to that project beginning. There's just so much more at stake when you have that much money riding on it, and it affects all owners within the community. So for the small fee of 0.5% to 5%, depending on the contractor, and you can evaluate the contractors based upon how much their bond percentage is. A contractor with a bond percentage of 5% is going to be much less liquid and much more risky than a contractor that has a 0.5% for a performance bond. So getting those numbers and having them line itemed out is going to help you to evaluate the competency and the history of that company from the side of an insurance company that's gone through and delved into their details and their financials. I do have some additional cases and specific examples in Florida. I'm not going to go into details and start clicking on these because it won't work well here in the webinar. But I can also provide this webinar directly to Castle Group, and they can go ahead and provide that to you guys if you'd like to delve deeper into some specific examples. So as far as construction bonds, I go pretty quick with these things. I didn't want to waste anybody's time. I did not see any questions and answers come up, but please, by all means, I'll be sitting here for the next few minutes, and I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have about bonds.
Well, I don't see any questions. Oh, there's one.
Perfect. So per last question asked, what can you explain the percentage detail? So absolutely. So when it comes to a bond, we had talked about how they rate those bonds based upon the financial liquidity of a company and the past history experiences with that company over projects over time. So typically we're going to find that the percentage of the project cost, and that's how they base the bond cost. So if it's $1 million project, the bond is going to be a percentage of that value. For a company that's very well established, has a great track record, and is financially stable, that percentage is going to be much lower, maybe 0.5% to 1%. A company that may have financial issues or has a bad track record, has pulled off of jobs or has lawsuits against them, that company is going to have a much higher percentage of bond rate, maybe a 5% bond rate. So 5% on $1 million, $50,000, whereas 1% on $1 million is going to be $1,000. So, or $10,000, excuse me. So when you're looking at that line item and you're seeing what the cost is from that bond company for the performance bond, it'll help you to evaluate the liquidity and the experience of the contractor based upon what the cost of the performance bond is. Did that answer your question for you? It's set by the surety company. So the surety company evaluates the company as the insurance broker basically for the project, and they're gonna base that percentage rate based upon what they find in the documentation and the history of the contractor. So it's similar to, like I had explained, with your car. If you have a bad driving record, your policy premium is going to be higher, whereas if you have a really good record, it's going to be less. How do we verify that? I've had bad experiences. So I don't necessarily understand the question. How do we verify that? The way we verify that, we typically have that is as a line item. So when we put a line item for what is this bond going to cost, you might have your general conditions. They are giving us the correct percentages. Yeah, that is a difficult question. It's one measure of how you can evaluate them, but you cannot guarantee that they're going to give you the correct percentages. It's going to be a total job cost. So you'll look at the project. If they are super high on one end and super low on that end. You'll have to evaluate it. You can always ask them specifically what their percentage is. And if you're worried about whether or not the contractor is lying to you, you should probably be working with a different contractor. You're most welcome.
Anybody else have any questions? Well, okay, I guess that wraps up today our webinar on construction bonds. I learned something new, so thank you very much, Mike, and to the team at Empire Works for sharing this valuable insight. If you guys have any further questions or would like to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out, and we appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.